Hello and welcome to this macroeconomics video on employment and unemployment, section 2.1.3 of the edexcel A specification. So in this video we're going to be looking at different measures of unemployment, the distinction between unemployment and underemployment, the significance of changes in the rates of employment, unemployment and inactivity, the causes of unemployment, the significance of migration in skills for unemployment and employment, and lastly the effects of unemployment on different actors. So part A, measures of unemployment, we're going to be looking at the claimant count. So what the claimant count is the number of people claiming job seekers allowance each month. And this is actually the older method. So it's people claiming the job seekers allowance, also called GSA, must declare that they are out of work and they're capable of, available for and seeking during the week in which their claim is made. So the week they make their claim, they must be capable of working and available to work straight away. Now, there's different problems associated with this method, is that it includes people who are claiming benefits but not actually available or prepared to work. It excludes some people who would like to work and who are looking for work but who are not eligible for unemployment benefits. So these might be women returning to work after having a baby. And also the government criteria often changes, which means it's hard to compare it to previous years or to different countries because of all the different changes that happens. And lastly, it excludes those who are on government training schemes. So technically they're unemployed, but it doesn't count them. And the second method, the ILO, also known as the International Labour Organization employment rate. This is a measure of the percentage of the workforce who are without jobs but who are available for work, willing to work and looking for work. So it's the people without a job who want a job, have actively sought a job in the last 4 weeks and are able to work within the next 2 weeks, or people who are out of work, found a job and waiting to start it in the next 2 weeks. So where the claimant counts people who are just actively seeking a job that week, they've been seeking it for 4 weeks previously and they're able to start work within the next 2 weeks. And it's a measure based on the labour force survey, and it's a newer method of the claimant count. So it's newer than the claimant count. Now there's also problems with this one, where it could be subject to sampling errors and may not be a true representation, because obviously there's so many people who are unemployed that it's going to be difficult to get every single one. So obviously there's always going to be a few different errors. And it's also difficult to decide whether somebody is sick or if they're actively seeking work. So that again is subject to sampling errors. Now the distinction between unemployment and underemployment, well, simply underemployment is where an individual is employed in a second choice occupation or is only able to work part-time in a job but would like to work full-time. So for example, if a doctor was working as a taxi driver due to no employment opportunities, then they're going to be underemployed because their training allows them to be working as a higher profession. So they're working, but it's not in the preferred sectors or hours. And unemployment, this is where an individual is actively searching for an employment but is unable to find work. So unemployment is often used as a measure of the health of an economy, and it's just when they can't find a job and they're not working. Part C, looking at the significance of changes in the rates of employment, unemployment and inactivity. There's different equations for these and they look quite complicated and tedious to learn, but actually if you just kind of think about it rather than looking too much to the mathsy side, it's a lot easier. So for example, the employment rate's just the number of people employed divided by the number of people who are able to be employed, so the working age population. And then obviously the unemployment rate's just the unemployed divided by the unemployed plus employed. The economic inactivity rate, this is economically inactive people divided by the working age. So that's people who are economically inactive divided by everyone who is able to work. And then the economically active rate, well, that's just the employed people plus the unemployed people. So the significance of this is, well, firstly, if the employment rate rises, it has a positive multiplier effect. And this is because if people of more earning more, so there's more Y, then it leads to more consumption. And as consumption is a component of AD, it means that AD will rise, aggregate demand. So aggregate demand shifts to the right. This then causes economic growth, which is good because then there's a smaller output gap. And it also means that the government's going to be receiving more in taxes. But one bad thing about this is it encourages imports. So, well, for goods that have a positive income elasticity of demand, it's going to encourage imports, which is bad for the trade deficit because it worsens it. And also it leads to inflationary pressures, and that's in another video regarding the Phillips curve. And so similarly, or more like oppositely, if unemployment rate rises, there's going to be a negative multiplier, and this is because less income leads to less consumption. So aggregate demand shifts inwards to the left, which reduces economic growth. Then there might be even more cyclical unemployment, and then the multiplier effect just goes down, downward spiral. But there might be increased governments, and also the government might be having to spend more while less is being received in taxes. So this means that there's even a bigger debt that the government has to pay back. So there's a risk of an even bigger government budget deficit. Dun, dun, dun. Now, section D, this looks really long. The causes of unemployment: structural unemployment, frictional unemployment, seasonal unemployment, demand deficiency, and cyclical unemployment. Real wage inflexibility. Okay, it's like takes longer to say than it actually is. Basically, frictional unemployment. This is when unemployment associated with job search. So I always think of it as, if you get your hands, one hand is rubbing against the other hand. Pretend these are different jobs, and when you're rubbing against, it creates friction. So it's like frictional, and then it's like the two jobs that's in between these two jobs. So, for example, if a graduate is straight out of university, or if someone's made redundant, or if someone's looking for new employment, and you can technically be classed as voluntary unemployed because workers are choosing to remain unemployed than take the first job available. So technically, in between the changeover of their job, they're voluntarily unemployed, but really, actually, they're just about to go into a new job. And it's not inefficient, as it's better to find the right job for a qualification than work in McDonald's if you're like meant to be a doctor or something, because then you're not working to your productive potential. So cyclical unemployment, this is when there's a low demand for labour. So if there's low aggregate demand, then there's not going to be the jobs because you don't need to supply as much goods, so you don't need as many workers. And it's called demand deficient unemployment. So this is when demand falls, so firms sell less, and you need to reduce production, so then less labour is required. Structural unemployment, well, this has got to do with the structure of the economy, surprise, surprise. So unemployment arising because of changes in the pattern of economic activity within an economy. So, for example, at the moment, the UK is undergoing a reduction in the steel industry, so there's more people losing their jobs. Seasonal unemployment, well, this is just unemployment arising in seasons of the year when demand is lower. So, for example, if you're a snowplower, then you're not going to have much luck in the summer. Real wage unemployment, well, this is when wages are above the equilibrium level, causing the supply of labour to be greater than the demand for labour. So more people who are like, yes, let's earn more money, but actually there's not that many jobs being supplied. Now, point E, looking at the significance of migration and skills for employment and unemployment. Fun. So migration brings both increased supply of labour and higher demand for labour. So in periods of high unemployment, they may contribute to unemployment. However, they're still not the underlying cause of the high unemployment. That would be the recession. So people always think, oh, they come in and they steal the jobs, but actually they're not the underlying problem. It's our economy. So that is actually everyone in it who is the problem. Now, immigrants can cause lower wages if they're working in certain sectors because they might be willing to work at lower wages. So obviously the employer might choose them over a candidate who wants to be earning 50 quid an hour. Might go for the one who's like, yep, I'll work for 7 quid an hour. And immigrants can help to meet skill shortages as well. So, for example, after World War II, we needed loads of builders and things. So we allowed in a lot of immigrants, and they helped to rebuild our whole economy to bring it to what it is today. There's different impacts of migration, but they depend on the age of the immigrant. For example, if it's a young immigrant who's coming in, they're going to lower the dependency ratio because it means that we've got more economically active people to pay for the young dependents and the elderly dependents. It also depends on the current economic climate, so the levels of unemployment. Obviously, if we've got high levels of unemployment, yes, they will contribute to increased pressure on jobs. But the UK's got a pretty good economy in comparison to the rest of the world, so actually they don't contribute that much to it. And also if the wealth is kept within the country or sent abroad. So the immigrants might come over, earn lots of money, but then actually send it back to their home country. And finally, if the economy can absorb a greater population. So that's similar to the current economic climate, except for depends how much services we've got and how many houses we've got. So for example, in London at the moment, there's a big housing shortage, which means that it does increase, immigrants moving to London does increase the housing shortage problem. So for firms, it leads to a low consumer spending, which means that for normal goods, for income elastic goods, there's going to be a reduced demand. Although if a firm's supplying inferior goods, which means that when income's lower, the demand for these goods rise, that might be power, for example, they're going to experience an increased demand, which is good for their companies. Greater supply of workers could lead to lower wages and salary levels. So if more people are willing to work, they will be willing to work at lower wages, which then leads to the overall salary level lowering. But firms might also encounter higher training costs, and this would be because they need to spend more on resources training new employees because the employees have been out of work for so long. And this links to my previous point of the erosion of skills for individuals. Now, the effect on workers, well, they might be inclined to work harder because there's more competition for jobs, so they're going to say, yep, we can work even harder than all the other people I'm competing against. But alternatively, they might actually find it difficult to find the motivation. So lots of firms motivate their workers by incentives like bonuses and raises. But if these incentives are gone because there's not enough money in the economy, they might say, you know what, actually, it's not worth working this hard. Now, the effect on the government, well, there's going to be fewer tax revenues because there's fewer people working, so there's less income tax. The gross domestic product of the country might also lower, and this links to the aggregate demand curve shifting inwards, which lowers economic output. And higher welfare costs because there'll be more people claiming benefits. The effect of unemployment on society can lead to a rise in mental health problems. There might be tension at home, particularly if both parents are not working. It can lead to political issues because all consumers and things might be saying to the government, you know, why have you led us into this recession? There'd be tension over a tax rise. So the government might say, actually, you know what, we need to raise taxes in order to fund all these welfare costs. And then people were saying, no, we don't have the money, blah, blah, etc. And the government have less money to spend on public goods because they're now directing more spending at welfare costs, so they don't have as much to spend on street lights and roads and infrastructure.